This is the sermon for the 26th Sunday after Pentecost. We are reading today from Luke's Gospel, the 21st chapter, beginning with the 5th verse. Some of his disciples were remarking about how the temple was adorned with beautiful stones and with gifts dedicated to God. But Jesus said, "As for what you see here, the time will come when not one stone will be left on another. Every one of them will be thrown down." "Teacher," they asked, "when will these things happen? And what will be the sign when they are about to take place?" He replied, "Watch out that you are not deceived, for many will come in my name, claiming, 'I am he,' and 'the time is near.' Do not follow them. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be frightened. These things must happen first, but the end will not come right away." Then he said to them, "Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, famines, and pestilences in various places, and fearful events and great signs from heaven. But before all this, they will lay hands on you and persecute you. They will deliver you to synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors, and all on account of my name. This will result in your being witnesses to them, but make up your mind not to worry beforehand how you will defend yourselves, for I will give you words and wisdom that none of your adversaries will be able to resist or contradict. You will be betrayed, even by parents, brothers, relatives, and friends, and they will put some of you to death. All men will hate you because of me, but not a hair of your head will perish. By standing firm, you will gain your life." Today's gospel is a part of something sometimes known as the Olivet Discourse, or the Little Apocalypse. It has parallels, by the way, in Mark's 13th chapter and in the 24th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. For the most part, the passage concerns itself with the destruction of Herod's temple in Jerusalem and the siege of the city itself in 70 AD, an event which may be described as the decisive occurrence in the First Jewish-Roman War. That is, of course, the historical context of this passage. So, the authors of the three synoptic Gospels have Jesus prophesying the destruction of Jerusalem. According to the narrative, the disciples comment on the greatness of the temple, a building thought to have been some 10 stories high and likely to have been adorned with gold, silver, and other precious items. Jesus responds that not one of these stones would remain intact in the building, and that in fact the entire thing would be reduced to rubble. The disciples ask Jesus for a sign. When will this happen? And how will we know we are near the end of the age? Jesus proceeds to tell them what the signs will not be. Many claiming to be the Messiah, wars and rumors of wars. These things must happen, Jesus says, but also counsels his disciples not to be afraid and to be aware, as it says in verse 9. The end will not come right away. It will not come all at once. He goes on to speak about nation rising up against nation, fearsome natural disasters, earthquakes, famines, and great signs in the heavens, as verse 11 says. He goes on to warn the disciples that even before that, they will be hated, persecuted, jailed, and even executed by the government for his sake. But as they stand firm, they will gain, well, our translation reads, they will gain their lives. But we'll speak of that particular verse in just a moment. But for now, we know that scholars debate just what was Jesus getting at here. He is obviously speaking of the imminent destruction of the temple, and these words were likely written down just after the temple's destruction. Now, just beyond today's reading, verse 20 seems to make it extremely clear. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation has come near. But by the time we get to verse 25, we begin to wonder if Jesus isn't in fact talking about something else entirely. And there will be signs in sun and moon and stars, and on the earth distress of nations and perplexity because of the roaring of the sea and the waves, people fainting with fear and with foreboding of what is coming on the world. For the powers of the heavens will be shaken, and then they will see the Son of Man coming in a great cloud with power and great glory. So the debate continues. Is this really just about Jerusalem, circa 70 AD? Or is Jesus' purported prophecy reaching into the future, as some might suggest, reaching even right into our times? Well, there are those who would calmly suggest that what Jesus was talking about is long since past. Much of Christianity seems preoccupied, if not obsessed, with the notion of end times prophecy, of interpreting these and other passages in such a manner that we might gain a clear understanding of what the world is in for. Certainly there is no shortage of discussion on the topic. There is scholarship and pseudo-scholarship. There are those who would claim to be prophets who proclaim the end with certainty. And then there are those who, with just as much certainty, declare the would-be prophets to be apostate. But before we scoff too much, we should take a moment to admit that we, as a culture, if not in fact as individuals, just like the disciples, want to know. It seems strange when one thinks about it, this desire to know about the end of the world. The psalmist asking the Lord to show him the number of his days, notwithstanding, is there anyone who really wants to know the day of their own death? Or to know what diseases they or their loved ones might contract in the future? But the end of the world, or if you prefer, the end of the age, is different because, like the disciples, all of whom were Jewish, with Jewish national hopes, we believe this coming age has something to do with justice, with our enemies getting their comeuppance, if you will. The Jews of Jesus' day held the notion that the Messiah would come from Jerusalem, from the temple in fact, and defeat Israel's enemies, most especially the government of Rome. And we, many of us as Christians, tend to hold to the notion that the Lord will return to vanquish our enemies. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage, where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the faithful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Great poetic words. We love the end times when we believe it brings wrath on our enemies, on those with a different religion, a different perspective, those whom we believe hurt us or might hurt us. I have seen him in the watchfires of 100 circling camps. They have builded him an altar in the evening dews and damps. I can read his righteous sentence by the dim and flaring lamps. His day is marching on. We long for for that day when it brings fierce and righteous judgment on the other. And so deep in our hearts we believe in a fiery gospel writ in burnished rows of steel. And indeed our God, clad in invincible armor, armed with weapons of mass destruction, is marching on. Now, if between the words and the images on your screen you are sensing some sarcasm, and you're finding yourself feeling uncomfortable or even offended, then it means I have to some extent done my job. You see, when Jesus told the disciples that no stone of the temple would be left standing, he wasn't just disparaging a great work of architecture. He wasn't even just putting down what many believed to be God's house. He was, in fact, dashing their hopes for the kind of Messiah they had been taught to believe in. How can the Messiah come from Jerusalem and the temple if there is no temple? If the Messiah doesn't come, how will our enemies be punished? How will we once again attain the glory of old? Record of prophecy past, words of warning for our imminent future with its global warming and mutually assured destruction. I'm afraid I will have to leave that particular question largely to the scholars and perhaps the pseudo-scholars. I'll leave it in the eschatological twilight zone where it probably belongs, although I will not dismiss the notion of apocalypse. To paraphrase René Girard, we must not, like some scholars, dismiss the apocalypse, for to do so would be to rob the Christian message of its vitality. Let me explain. Apocalypse comes from the Greek apocalypsis, literally an uncovering, a revealing, and that is what Jesus is doing with his disciples, and what I believe he does with us as well. He reveals, he uncovers the truth of what we are, and even more importantly, the truth of what we shall be. The disciples ask Jesus, "When shall these things be?" And he responds with a horrifying laundry list of things that will happen, even including things that shall happen to them. But the end doesn't happen at once, as we read in verse 9. The revealing doesn't take place all at once. It happens a little bit at a time. The wars and the rumors of wars and how we respond to such things reveals to us who we are. When we are challenged, persecuted, brought before the courts of law, and even threatened with death, it is revealed to us what we are, how far we have come, or not. Do we meet violence with violence? Do we return evil for evil? Are we willing to travel the narrow road of peace? Will we turn the other cheek? Will we pray for our enemies and do good to those who hurt us? Scholars suggest that Jesus used apocalyptic language, like so many preachers of his day, to get people's attention. That his use of the apocalyptic was largely symbolic. Perhaps so. Allow me now to take two components from this so-called Olivet discourse that I believe are speaking to us today. So, the wars and rumors of wars, the pestilence and signs in the heavens in our world, in our nation, and in our own lives, reveal to us who we are and what we shall be, and we may clearly see that we are being called to follow the way of Jesus. But we still ask, when? When shall I be able to do that? Oh Lord, I'm not strong enough, not brave enough, not good enough. I have angers and hurts I can't relinquish. I know I may not have a right to them, but they are still there, staring at me like the old Adam every single day of my life. Lord, when will I be able to be like you? Please, reveal it to me. And the answer comes in the image of that temple, the place where we thought all our spiritual hopes came from, the temple of our own righteousness, the temple of our own sense that we are better than our enemies, better than our persecutors, our sacred notions that our religion, our gods, are better than that belonging to the other. When the temple of justified violence and prejudice, when the temple of all in which we humanly place our hopes, our sense of self-righteousness, our sense of entitlement, our sense of grandeur, lies in ruins, when no lithos, when no stone stands on top of the other, then we shall be able to persevere. Then, as Jesus says, we will endure, and there, as we read in verse 19, we shall find our life. But you see, that is the second component, that which I said we would return to at the beginning of this discussion. In our English translation, we have translated that word as life. But the original word here is psyche, literally the breath, but essentially meaning the soul, the essence of who we are and who we shall be, the core of what Christ is calling us shall be revealed for us, for all of us, in time, little by little.